Thank you all for joining us today for the Election Roadmap for Your Employee Communications. This is a program on how your business or association can be an effective messenger of accurate and trusted information as the 2024 election unfolds. My name is Sarah Bonk, and I'm the founder of Business for America. We're really excited to partner with the Brennan Center for Justice and Accenture to bring you this event. For those of you joining us for the first time, Business for America is a nonpartisan, nonprofit business membership organization. We engage businesses to help improve our country's civic health by increasing civic participation, restoring trust in our democratic institutions, encouraging bipartisanship, and setting a positive example for business engagement. We help companies engage their employees in their communities, and we also help advance public policies to improve how our government, political system, and civic sectors function. We do not support political parties or candidates. So thank you to our promotional partners, Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives, the Brennan Center for Justice, the Business and Democracy Initiative, the Corporate Political Responsibility Task Force at the Herb Institute at the University of Michigan, State Business Executives, and Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility. I also wanted to thank our amazing partner organizations who put together all the wonderful nonpartisan election communication resources that we're going to be sharing with you today. So today we have 3 goals. First, the roadmap. We want to give you a clearer picture of what to expect over the coming weeks and months of this election process, as well as the potential hiccups along the way. We're going to cover some of that information here, and we're also going to provide you with helpful links and greater detail that you can access on your own time as well. Second, resources. We have curated a rich set of nonpartisan communication resources, templates, and messaging that you can leverage through each phase of the election process. These tools are based on the latest research on how to communicate effectively with folks from across the political spectrum, allowing you to support civic engagement for all voters without taking sides in the election. These tools will help you address questions or confusion that may emerge around election rules, help your employees spot deepfakes, and help you respond to threats of violence and other disruptions. And finally, support. Our work doesn't end today. After this session, we'll send you all the links to the resources we share here in this program, but we're also going to continue to stay in contact when we have new and updated information and as situations emerge. Of course, if you don't want those tools or just want to opt out, you're welcome to do so at any time. Just let us know. And with that, I am delighted to introduce you to today's speaker. Derek Tisler serves as counsel at the Brennan Center's Elections and Government Program. His work focuses on issues related to election administration, security, and disinformation. He is the co-author of several Brennan Center reports, including the roadmap to the official count in the 2024 election, some parts of which you'll be seeing today. Andrew Levy is Chief Corporate and Government Relations Officer at Accenture, where he leads a geopolitical strategic analysis and government relations function globally. Andrew will share an exciting new tool to help educate your employees about the risks of deceptive AI. And finally, Chip York is Business for America's Director of Marketing and Communications, who will present our curated communications resources, which are tailored to each phase of the election process. Chip previously served in marketing and communications leadership roles at the Coca-Cola Company and Ketchum Communications. And with that, I'll hand it off to you to take it from here.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Bonk. So we designed this program today to specifically address the needs that companies and organizations have to be a trusted resource of election information during this unprecedented time. And so today we partnered with the Brennan Center to lay out the 4 phases of the election process, the results, and how companies and organizations can be a positive influence along the way. So today's presentation will focus on these 4 phases, from what we are experiencing right now through election day itself, the period for when votes are counted and verified, and then finally the transfer of power after the results are final. So to kick it off, I'm going to hand it over to my friend Derek Tisler, counsel at the Brennan Center for Justice, to take us through the first phase.
Thank you, Chip, and thank you to all of Business for America for asking me to join this call. I'm really excited to be presenting this information with you all today. So to start out, for those who don't know the Brennan Center for Justice, we are an independent, nonpartisan law and policy organization, and we work to reform, revitalize, and defend our country's systems of democracy and justice. We strive to uphold the values of democracy, and we advance reforms that help make American democracy accessible to all voters. So as Chip said, I'm going to be providing a little bit of a roadmap to what we can expect in the 2024 election. And starting with what can we see leading up to Election Day? And the main story here is that, Election Day is simply the last day of voting. I think that's a really important thing to recognize, this new reality where far more voters are able to cast ballots early in person, far more voters are able to cast ballots by mail. And it means that the election is happening now. We keep saying things like, it's only 2 weeks until the election. It's now. People are voting. As of today, more than 20 million voters have already cast a ballot in the 2024 election. That's just going to accelerate as we get closer to Election Day. And the reason for that is these massive changes in policy over the past couple decades to open up more options for voters. So as shown in this map here, 47 states now offer early in-person voting to all voters. This includes states that offer an experience similar to Election Day, where you mark your ballot and feed it into a scanner, or in-person absentee options, where you can receive, mark, and return a mail ballot right at a designated location. There's been a similar increase in the availability of mail voting. 36 states now allow all voters to cast a ballot by mail without needing to provide an excuse. Every state allows at least some voters to cast a ballot by mail. 8 of the states automatically send mail ballots to every registered voter. These are the purple states, mostly in the western part of the country. And then there are also 9 states that offer voters the option to sign up to receive a mail ballot automatically every election. So there are a ton of voters who have already received a mail ballot. Maybe they've returned it already. Maybe it's sitting on their kitchen table just waiting to be filled out. But the point is, people are actively engaging in this election right now. And on the next slide, we'll see that this diagram is a little bit hard to see, but the point is on the left, if you notice, all those states kind of bunched up in the top part of that triangle. In 2016, overwhelmingly, Election Day in-person voting was the dominant mode of voting. And then we saw in 2020, voters kind of trickling down to those other pre-Election Day options. Much more mail voting, much more early voting. This election, we expect to see a little bit of a decline in mail voting compared to 2020, but still much higher than we saw in 2016. And then as of now, early in-person numbers seem to be fairly consistent with what we saw in 2020 and maybe even a little bit higher. So all that's to say, again, people are voting right now in this election, and there is a lot of stuff happening for that reason. Next slide. And the important thing to keep in mind as we're moving through this election process is when we look at false information about the election process, the dominant rumors are going to change as we move to each step, from registration to voting to counting ballots. And that's because part of what makes a rumor stick is it's relevant to current events. If you're talking about something like voting machines malfunctioning, it's a lot more convincing when people are actually using those voting machines. So when we're thinking about, what is the information that voters are most in need of finding, it's often going to match exactly where we're at in the election process. So as an example, now that we're in the early voting period, we're seeing a lot of rumors in particular about mail voting. Maybe somebody received multiple absentee ballot applications. There's been a lot of rumors about military and overseas voting, things like that. We're also starting to see now that there's more in-person early voting happening, things like voting machine malfunctions, allegations that voting machines are flipping votes for voters. These are the types of things that we would expect to see right now, and these are the types of things that voters are going to have the most questions about now for that reason. The important thing to keep in mind is that, a lot of this information is false, right? We know that the same rumors get recycled over and over. They get mapped onto new examples, new allegations. We encourage everyone to, take a moment, breathe. If something seems ridiculous, maybe it is. Take the time to, find the trusted source of information on this, which is a lot of what Chip is going to be talking about today.
Well, thank you, Derek, for taking us through the first part of the process and the risks that early voting and electioneering may present to voters and employees. So obviously, generative artificial intelligence will be both a threat and a concern in influencing the electorate, both within the US and from afar. So to speak about that, I'd like to introduce Richard Eidlin, who is our National Policy Director at Business for America, to say a word about our work on battling deceptive AI and also to introduce our next speaker. So hand it over to Richard.
Great, good. Thanks, Chip. So I just wanted to make everyone aware that Business for America over this past year has been working on several bills in Congress, all bipartisan efforts to address the threat that AI may pose to the election. And in particular, we work closely with Senator Klobuchar and Senator Josh Hawley's office on the Senate Bill 2770, which focused on banning the use of misleading and purposely misleading and deceptive AI as it applies to a federal candidate running for office. That bill, unfortunately, while having been heard in committee, in the Senate Rules Committee, doesn't appear to have the votes to make it through. But we felt very strongly and worked with a number of our business colleagues on promoting the passage of that legislation, because we've already seen many examples nationally and in local races of deceptive AI, generative AI being used to create and misleading narratives about a candidate. The bill would have made a provision or an exception for parody or satire. So it's important to know that this legislation will likely be reintroduced in Congress next year. And we'll be happy to work with you all on that. So I want to turn it back over to Andrew. And Andrew, as we heard, is with Accenture. Accenture has created a really sort of game-changing toolkit that all of you can use in the coming weeks to help educate your employees about the potential threats of AI and how to become a more active and wise consumer of information. So Andrew, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Richard and Sarah and Chip. Great to be with you. Thanks for inviting me. Maybe I'll just take a quick step back before we talk about deepfakes, just because it's consistent, I think, with the overall purpose of the call and the mission of BFA. And so we've been on a journey at Accenture, led largely by our CEO, Julie Sweet, to work on increasing civic engagement for our employees across many different dimensions. We weren't starting from zero, but we've been building on what we've done in past election cycles. So, in particular, looking ahead to this cycle, we did a couple of things we hadn't done before. We gave paid time off to all of our employees across the U.S. to vote or to work as poll workers, 4 hours. We also flagged the issue of deepfakes as an area of concern that people have to be vigilant about and make sure that they're looking to credible sources or multiple sources on issues that are important to them. We also made available to all of our employees resources to help them in their individual states to register to vote and to participate in the election. So that effort hopefully will drive more engagement during the election and going forward for our people. And that, of course, is done all about civic engagement as opposed to any particular policies, parties, candidates, et cetera. And then on the issue of deepfakes, as people are probably aware, in this, I'll focus on the elections for context for a second and then talk a bit more broadly. But we've seen in past elections that we've been seeing in this election in the U.S. as well as others, whether it's Taiwan, India, elsewhere, where bad actors or those who wish to influence voters will use AI to manipulate media, visual images, voice, etc. So we want to make sure that people have as much information as they can about how easy it is to create deepfakes, how little information is currently required given the evolution of the technology, and just how quickly they can be done. Elections is one context where we're, particularly timely right now, of course, and throughout this year, but we see it also in people's personal lives with different sorts of frauds. We see it in professional context as well, with companies being subject to attempts to commit fraud or pilfer funds from enterprises. So we did a couple things. We created what you're looking at now, which is called the first AI ID kit, which, as the screen says, has resources and tips to get better, for people to better understand how to identify, respond to, and hopefully mitigate the risk of being a victim of deepfakes across those three different dimensions: professional, personal, and civic. And then within this, we created a video, sort of a PSA, if you will. It's about 5 minutes long, which is really intended to amplify that awareness, right? For people to see for themselves just how pervasive the deepfake challenge is across those dimensions, and hopefully lead them to engage with this website and the resources that we make available. This is something we did to support the cause, if you will, of education and awareness. And we are, and this conversation is part of it, trying to get it in the hands of as many people as we can across all of our clients, their families, really anyone, right? It's a resource that we just want to get out to as many people as possible. And this last thing I'll say, this particular website, and I think Richard and the team will send this around to everyone on the call so you can interact with it yourself. But as we all know, just like the AI technology is evolving super quickly, so too will deepfakes and the tools to mitigate the risk of them, et cetera. So this will be a living platform where we, Accenture, as well as partners of ours, hopefully, who are in this space, will have a home to continually update and provide the most current resources and tools to enable people. So with that, Richard, unless there's anything else that I'm supposed to cover that I didn't, I can leave it to you.
No, that's good. Let's show that video.
And here we go.
You're here to learn about deepfakes, right? I've spent the past year of my life discovering exactly how AI can be used in real-life scams. This is my friend Hannah. Let's take this video of her.
First room is done in the first house I've ever owned, and we went with moss green.
New mom, just the sweetest person. But we'll get back to her later. You've probably been seeing a lot of crazy headlines about AI, how it can now be used to synthesize just about any type of media. These are examples of deepfakes, where someone has manipulated someone else's appearance and voice and used them for their own purposes.
What's up, TikTok?
For example, to steal money, votes, or even create explicit content. This technology is capable of shaping our perception of reality. And even though it might be completely fake, the consequences are far from it. It can bring down companies of all sizes. Small businesses all over the world are getting deepfake phone calls from who they believe to be a trusted vendor, asking for immediate payment on an overlooked account. And once they pay it, that money's not coming back. Maybe you've heard about the worker at that one company who made a transfer of tens of millions of dollars at the request of the company's CEO, except it wasn't the company's CEO, it was an advanced AI voice clone of them. The damage adds up real fast. Deepfakes even have the potential to derail elections. Just think, what if a damaging video of what looks like a candidate emerges in the final hours of an election?
Deep-faked audio of President Biden told some not to vote.
The consequences can be very real.
Я змушений приймати складні рішення.
Because these days, it's become ridiculously easy.
First room is done in the first house I've ever owned.
You remember my friend Hannah?
Hey, please don't tell anyone, but they've got me in jail and I need you to wire me bail money right now or I'll have to spend the night here. Please.
You used to need hours of audio or thousands of photos to pull off a good deepfake. Now with just a single clip or even a single image, a bad actor can make a play for your money, your vote, your reputation, your identity, you. Luckily, I don't have any bad intentions. But imagine what would happen if I did. I can make it look like Hannah's here. Or here. or even hear.
I'm a regular customer, and you're not going to just interrupt me mid-sentence and turn to somebody else like I'm doing something crazy, and I am not crazy. All I wanted was a warm... Are you filming me?
This is just what I was able to do while you were watching this. Think about what I could do if I had more time. It's not complicated to do anymore, which means it can be done by anyone, to anyone, even you. And this is why we created a dedicated digital platform, the first AI ID kit, with everything you need to know. But to get you started, I could give you some quick tips. If you get an email, text, call, or video that seems suspicious, just stop. That's your biggest line of defense. All you have to do is stop. And check that this person is actually who they say they are by getting back to them using some other method. What scammers are trying to do is get you to act quickly and without thinking. So all you gotta do is stop and ask yourself a question. Do I know this person, right? Does it seem legit? Are they asking me something unusual, urgent, or weirdly emotional? Another great idea is decide on a safe word with those closest to you. Then, in any situation where something seems kind of off, go ahead and ask for it. My personal safe word is space penguin. Well, it was, but now I have to change it because I told you, so thanks a lot. If you're still worried, all you have to do is end the conversation. Unfortunately, this is the world we live in now. Get familiar with the first AI ID kit now, and get to know deepfakes before they know you.
Thanks for sharing that, Richard. And I was just going to say, I neglected to mention before, so in addition to creating this video and making it available along with the website to anyone, at Accenture, we made it part of our mandatory training. So all 750,000+ people in the company will have to take it. And I know we have a lot of corporate representatives on the call today. We're reaching out to all our existing clients to offer this directly and to provide any assistance if necessary, if a company wants to use it in a similar training fashion. But I'm also happy to take any questions or queries about that if it's of interest. Just wanted to add that. Thanks, Richard.
Great. Good. Thank you. Good.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Richard, so much for sharing this amazing platform and really eye-opening video that I think we're really going to encourage everybody on this call, including our members, to share, not just with their fellow employees, but also with their friends and family. So let's jump back into employee communications, especially around this first part of the voting period, which is now through Election Day, and some tools and resources that can be deployed into your workforce. But before we jump in, we do want to be super transparent about where these resources are coming from. The first is a group called the Democracy Communications Collaborative, or DCC, as you're going to hear me refer to them throughout this call. And the goal of this organization is to really get out transparent, nonpartisan, and tested messaging that convey easily understood facts and information about how our elections are run, how votes are counted, and how results are confirmed. And this Democracy Communications Collaborative was founded by dozens of organizations across the political spectrum who seek to inform the public about, as I said, how elections are run, but also to debunk the mis and disinformation that is rampant and out there right now. We at BFA serve on its communications table to provide a business perspective to this messaging and to really help shape the message and communications that will resonate with the business community and its employees. In addition to the DCC, we will also share resources from the Civic Business Initiative, a nonpartisan effort of the Harvard Negotiation Project, whose purpose is to lessen the likelihood of negative outcomes around the 2024 election cycle and beyond for business. You will also see templates and strategies from Civic Alliance, which many of you are familiar with. Just last week, Civic Alliance released this election messaging toolkit, which you'll see in the chat. We're also going to be referring to a number of other resources and toolkits that are readily available on their website. And then finally, we're going to highlight a new guide that has just been released from Axios, which is a super practical toolkit that provides strategies, checklists, and guidance for particularly the executive and managerial community. And again, as Richard said and as Bonk said, at the following this call, we're going to be sending out everything that you're going to see today. So don't freak out if we go through it at a pretty quick clip. So the first guide is from the DCC, and this is an ongoing resource that is updated weekly. Here is a screenshot of the general guidance section of it. It's a live Google Doc that is open to all. There are pages and pages of messaging guidance that cover key topics that really go into deep dives around current events, election mis and disinformation. And in the chat, you'll find a link to last week's guidance that we put out, and then we'll have updated guidance for this week in the next couple of days. And as mentioned before, with the Accenture tool and like seeing the threats that are out there with deepfakes and deceptive AI, we're really going to see this as a serious challenge to our election. And we want to make, and within the DCC resource guide, we're going to have updated messaging that you can deploy with your employees to really elevate employee knowledge around these risks and how they can prepare themselves. On the proactive side, Civic Alliance has released an excellent resource that you can use to customize to your audience and stakeholders. And this includes the template that you see here that can be customized to send out in advance of Election Day to reinforce the guardrails that are in place to ensure election integrity. And again, no, this is hard to read here, but you'll get all of these tools afterward. And then also from Civic Alliance, recognizing that there could be conflict and division in the workplace. We're seeing this a lot and we're hearing it from our members. Civic Alliance has developed this excellent resource to address those issues in the workplace. So there's politics and polarization in the workplace, an employer guide to bridge building. So that is available to you as well. And then before we get into the second phase, this last this last resource I wanted to share from Axios is, given this potential for workplace conflict, we know that this will be a really tricky time for managers. And the guide that Axios released, there is this special section that I did a screenshot of that provides strategies to help managers to prep the workplace environment post-election. It includes these 7 manager FAQs to prep in advance of the election results. So again, super handy guide for managers. So that was a lot, but moving on to phase 2, we're now at Election Day, which will be filled, we know, especially amongst our communities, our workplaces, and our families, anxiety. There's going to be lots of polls, lots of media declarations. There might even be candidates that declare victory early, and there's going to be lots of calls for patience. So let me hand it back over to Derek to talk about what we should expect that day.
Great, thanks, Chip. So Election Day, you know, as I said, it's the last day of voting. It's still the highest attention day of voting, and a lot of people are going to wait until that last day to cast their ballot. Once polls close, then people will start to see, you know, the first results of those cast ballots. And the important thing to emphasize here is that election results are never final on election night. The full process for counting votes involves a series of steps, some of which I'll go over on this presentation, that take place over the course of weeks. And a lot of our perception of election night is based on, you know, a typical voter's experience, which is that you cast your ballot and then you go home and you turn on the news and you wait to see who won the election. But those are media projections that we're looking out for, and there's a difference between when has there been enough ballots counted that we can be confident who won the election, and when are results actually final. So in 2020, as we all know, it took longer than we're used to call the result of the presidential election. And with a very close presidential election, once again, we don't expect to have a call on election night. And we know that, again, from 2020, this is a period where there can be a lot of false information being spread about the process, because there are a lot of people who have a lot of anxiety about the elections. They're obviously deeply passionate about the outcome of the elections, and they're hungry for more information. And the problem is, as election workers are just doing the normal process of counting votes, there's not really a lot of information that we can give to these anxious voters. And that can lead some people to, you know, start seeking out information anywhere they can find it, even if it is from less reputable sources than they may normally go to for their news. So this period in particular is one that we're watching closely and will be very important for voter education. So one common question that comes up is, why do some states take longer to report results than others? And, when we're talking about which states, we're talking about those 7 or so swing states that are really going to decide the outcome of the presidential election. So I wanted to walk through a few examples to kind of explain why that is. So if we start with this slide, this is basically your typical state and what is happening during the election process. So obviously during early voting, people are casting ballots. And then when polls close, election workers are processing and tabulating mail ballots and beginning the process of tabulating in-person ballots as well. Once you have information from individual voting machines, you're aggregating results and reporting those to the public. And then in the few weeks after Election Day, you're kind of going through all those checks, double checks to make sure that all votes are accounted for before results are certified. So if you go to the next slide. So this is how things look different in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. In most states, when mail ballots come in before Election Day, election workers are able to start taking steps to process those ballots. And that's essentially verifying the voter's eligibility, checking their signature, opening the ballot, maybe flattening out the ballot so it can be fed into a scanner, and then maybe also feeding it into a scanner. Basically doing everything you need to do to count that ballot, except for generating the results of that vote. In 43 states, you can do all of this as ballots come in before Election Day. But in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, you can't begin processing mail ballots until Election Day. And it's for this reason that it typically takes longer for these states to release a larger share of their results, because there are all these steps that you need to do to verify mail ballots before they can get counted. And in many cases, that those processes may not begin until later in the day on Election Day, or even when polls close. So we can expect in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, as in 2020, to be a little bit slower to report results. So in Arizona, they have a little bit of a different issue, but it's related, right? For the most part, election officials there can be processing those mail ballots as they come in. But one big exception is mail ballots that are dropped off at a polling place on Election Day. In that case, election workers can't retrieve those ballots and start processing them until polling places close on Election Day. So in Maricopa County, the largest county in Arizona, this is particularly a problem because there are a lot of voters who wait until that last minute to drop off their mail ballots. And that means that you can't even begin the process of verifying and counting those ballots until polls close on Election Day. And realistically, it's a couple hours after, because those ballots need to be transported from polling place to counting facility. Arizona is going to be one of the slower states to release results for this reason. And then as one last example, Nevada. Nevada is also traditionally a slower state to release results. That's mostly due to just high numbers of mail voting in the state. But one particular way in which Nevada is different from the other swing states is that they allow mail ballots to be counted if they are postmarked on Election Day and then arrive at the election office within 4 days of Election Day, right? So there are many other states that have similar rules. The idea is to make sure that a voter isn't disenfranchised by mail slowdowns, but Nevada is the only one of these swing states that has this process, which means that we won't even have all the ballots accounted for on election night. Some may still come in the days after. So all that's to say, under our Constitution, each state gets to set their own processes, their own rules, their own timelines. Just because one state is doing something different doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the way they're counting those votes.
Great. Thank you so much, Derek, for walking us through that. I think it's going to be critical information for a lot of us to have in the back of our minds, so that even if we're out, socially or in our casual conversations and we hear some misinformation, we have some of those facts that we can, include in a civilized rebuttal, I guess I would say. So with everything that Derek just explained, it's important for employers to set the expectations that results are going to be slow and that we need to be patient. So here are some resources for you to be a positive influence in that. So from the DCC, the key theme that we really want to encourage is that it's better to be right than to be fast. And we have key messaging, we have statements that underscore that speed does not mean accuracy and that it is important to know the process. And you'll see here as well, this will include directly combating misinformation with clear, concrete facts, and you see a couple of examples here. And here's a template from Civic Alliance that can be repurposed and customized as an email communication or internal messaging through things like Slack or whatever your communication platforms to really encourage patience and empathy in the workforce and recognize the anxiety that so many are going through, especially on this day when, I think everybody's attention is going to be at an all-time high. And the temperature is going to be quite high. So this is another tool that can be used. And finally, on election day, it may be wise just to have a statement come from the top down. And this is a CEO template statement from Civic Business Initiative with the goal of really lowering the temperature, and which is going to be just super imperative on election day, as I said. And in this context, we're encouraging this for internal communication, but this is a template that can easily be used as an external statement or an external communications if a company or an organization so wishes. And again, all of these tools are highly customizable and free to use, and will be available after this webinar. So after election day, we expect a very prolonged process to count, audit, and certify the votes in our elections, especially in swing states. And there are actions that your organization can do to lower the temperature, like I just said, be a trusted source of information, and mitigate the risks that may be threatening our civil society. So I'm going to hand it back over to Derek to talk about the process post-election day.
So after Election Day, there's a series of steps that officials conduct in between when we first see those unofficial results and when results get finalized. And the point of all these steps is to make sure we got it right, that every vote is accounted for and every vote has been accurately counted. And this is, I would say, part of the process that received very little attention previously, but has now been put into a much larger spotlight since 2020. All these various things, at times more formal procedures, at times security measures to, again, make sure we got everything correct. So just to highlight some of the key steps that counties and states will be going through. So one, after initial results are released, they go through a canvassing process. And what they're doing there is checking all available documentation, comparing numbers of voters checked in and ballots cast at each polling place and what the machines go and what the paper records are. All of that information just to make sure we've accounted for every ballot cast. Every ballot has only been counted once. And if there are any minor differences between those numbers, can we explain why it is there's a discrepancy there? That's the canvassing process. Second, states conduct audits, where the most common thing that you're doing there is you're checking a sample of the actual paper records of votes, typically by hand, and you're checking the sample against the voting machine counts to make sure those voting machines were working as they should, and that the software totals are complete and accurate. Recounts, so state and counties may conduct a recount if there's an especially close margin. And there you're recounting every single ballot cast, sometimes by hand, sometimes by using different equipment than was initially used, and sometimes a combination of both. And the point is, again, make sure every ballot was accurately recorded and that our complete count is accurate. And then finally, there are election contests. And this is essentially if there is a candidate who's not satisfied that an election was conducted correctly, they can sue in court. They can contest the outcome of the election, and each state sets different processes for how these contests take place, often specifying timelines to make sure that everything is resolved before state and federal deadlines for finalizing results. And then finally, once all these steps take place, somebody needs to sign off on the paperwork and say, we're done. We have a complete and accurate count, and that's what certification is. So once vote counts are final, local officials formally approve and sign off on final results for local elections. For state elections, those results then get sent up to state officials who again sign off and say, these are the final results. The act of certifying the election is mandatory. It doesn't matter if the person charged with the duty doesn't like the results. Their legal responsibility is to sign off on them. And importantly, states have different processes available to enforce certification if an official refuses to do so, as we have seen some instances of in recent elections. So in some cases, there may be specific state statutes that outline a process. That could be that a state official can go certify on behalf of a local official, or courts can step in and order a local official to fulfill their legal duty to certify. And so all that's to say, a refusal to certify does not mean that there is a problem with an election. We've seen some kind of symbolic attempts to do so in recent elections. There is a chance that that happens once again in 2024. It doesn't mean that there was a problem. Every state still went through all of those checks that I talked about to make sure that their count is final, complete, and accurate. And there are processes in place to make sure that certification ultimately does happen in a timely fashion. And then, so this is just quickly showing a slide that essentially outlines how different results get finalized. So if you look starting from the top left, if it's a local election, local officials certify their results, and at that time, election results are final. If it's a state or federal race, it gets kicked up to state officials. They certify results, and then results are final. And then finally, if it is the president or vice president, it then gets sent to the governor or another state executive to issue a certificate of ascertainment, which I'll get into in a second. And that's when you start the electoral college process of finalizing the vote count.
Great. So thanks, Derek. So from a communications perspective, it's going to be critical after Election Day to really check the pulse of your workplace and really reinforce the understanding of checks and balances. In the DCC guide, there are explainers on who is involved in the tabulation, the certification process, and statements and calls to action that can be used to kind of steady drumbeat of communications to really put into layman's terms a lot of the things that Derek just walked us through, and just to make sure that there is an influx or availability of information so that if people have questions, they can get their answers. And it may also be important to debunk some of the false narratives that will for sure arise. And in the DCC guide, there's over a dozen topics that are already covered, whether it be about claims of non-citizen voting, how overseas ballots are counted, state level claims. So you see the example here from Wisconsin. We have we have the speaking points for Georgia and other states as well, and even addressing conspiracy theories like what we saw in the aftermath of the hurricanes and some of the things that were flying around about government response. And like we highlighted strategies to support managers prior to Election Day, Axios highlights ways to support staff through this particular time of uncertainty after the election. And I know it's really hard to read here, but this guide specifically calls out case studies from Patagonia, JP Morgan Chase, and Apple on post-election employee engagement that they fulfilled in 2020. And so there's some really good learnings there that can be adopted for 2024. So we're going to take it home through the transfer of power, and I'm going to hand it back over to Derek to take us through this last phase.
Yeah, so just briefly, I want to touch on where we move from the realm of state law, where each state is setting their own processes for how to count ballots, finalize results, to the realm of federal law, which governs how the results for president and vice president get finalized and that new candidate ultimately takes office. So there are a number of key deadlines that federal law sets out in this process, beginning with December 11th, which is what I was just talking about in that graph. So each state, it's usually the governor, but it could be another executive, will issue a certificate of ascertainment, which names the people who will cast the state's electoral votes for president and vice president, right? This is just another kind of formality. A governor receives results saying that one presidential candidate won, and say, okay, because of that, these are the electors, and sign off on that certificate. December 17th, those electors will meet in their state capitals to cast their votes for president and vice president. December 25th is the deadline for those votes to reach the US Senate. January 6th is a date that we're all familiar with now. That is when Congress meets to count those electoral votes. And then January 20th is ultimately when a new president and vice president will take office. So these are some of the key dates to be aware of when we may see, again, false information about elections arising, as well as potential political pressure on these individuals, or even symbolic shows of force or protest around these key events.
Great, thank you, Derek. And I think one of the things to really highlight here is December 17th. So we will be developing in the DCC some messaging similar to what I've shared before, but given that December 17th is going to be a key date across state capitals across the country, especially in swing states, where there might be a lot of false and misinformation going around, I think companies need to be prepared to be a voice of reason and a voice of true information for that day in particular. So just wanted to call that out real quick. So to wrap it up, we know that we've given you a lot of information and resources to digest, a little bit of drinking by the fire hose. But after this call, you will all be receiving an email with a link that will take you to a resource repository that we've developed. And it's going to have everything that you've seen here today and much, much more. Did a lot of screenshots of much larger toolkits and resources. So we will communicate with you when there are updates. We do update a lot of these resources quite regularly, given the fact that, new issues come up, developments quickly happen in this environment, and we want to make sure that we're nimble and providing you the services and resources that you need to engage your employees. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up and hand it maybe over to Bonk to see if there's any questions from the audience.
We do have a couple of questions. So first of all, question from Michael. Are there more resources such as a flyer or PDF that we could share with chamber members to help combat AI?
Yes, so there is a number of different versions of flyers that we can send out to you. And some of them can even be customized with your own branding and your own logo. So I'd encourage you, to get into the repository, but also just please reach out to me, chip@bfa.us, for any assistance that you need or any questions that you have with any of the resources that you've seen today.
Another, less of a question than just a point to raise here, was that there is an online guide to de-risking your corporate civic engagement that was in partnership with Civic Alliance. So our friend Elizabeth at the Herb Institute's Corporate Political Responsibility Task Force just wanted to be sure people know that those legal resources are available, and we'll make sure that gets linked to, I think, Civic Alliance's material. There's lots of cross-posting here, so you'll also find that in the Civic Alliance materials. So great, thank you for calling that out, Elizabeth. And then we have a question from John saying that he completed his training this week to be an election officer in Virginia, and asks, what can election officers like myself do if a chief officer refuses to certify their poll results and send them to their state elections office? And I might answer that really quickly also here, just to say that while we are focused here today on really communicating with your employees, your key stakeholders, who are looking to you as a trusted source, we have another effort going on where we are talking about what can businesses do to help encourage our elected officials, various public officials, in following the process and helping to ensure that our stability, not promoting violence, like helping to prevent violence, that's a goal that we all share. So John, I just would say stay tuned. We will be in touch with you about those kinds of questions separately.
Derek, would you add anything?
So I would just say an election officer being a poll worker in Virginia, this is an endless source of frustration for me that a poll worker is called a different thing in every state. So one, I would just thank you for being a poll worker. It is truly the best way to participate in the democratic process and learn more about how elections actually work. In terms of the question about what can you do if results aren't certified, I don't know if there is necessarily anything I would recommend from that position. Again, there are enforcement mechanisms available in every state that have proven to be successful whenever someone has refused to certify results. So those processes will be available and will play out.
Great. Great. I think another question for you, Derek, here from Abby. What would you recommend as a good link to have to include all voting results, not just projections, so where people can see where the actual state of elections is? Without going to all 50 states, maybe.
You know, so there are a number of media sources that will aggregate election results across all states. They've gotten very, very good at doing this very, very fast. And you can typically find these things side by side on, New York Times or Washington Post or a lot of these sources where they are putting the raw vote totals, and then they have a number of ways to convey various forecasts that their own models develop. If you're a hardcore elections fan, you could be on those county websites checking out results, but wouldn't really recommend that for anyone on election night.
Great. All right. With that, we want to thank you all for joining us today. And we hope that this is going to be really helpful to you. And we want to extend an invitation to our next event, which is coming up next week, how business can respond to political violence. Really, it's about like the threat of political violence, not even just waiting for the outbreak. So we're bringing together political violence experts. Unfortunate that such a thing has to exist, but we're bringing together some great minds, and we're going to discuss the causes and dynamics of election-related violence. We're going to talk about proven methods that businesses can use to respond effectively along with civil society. This is something that has been going on globally and necessary now here too in the United States. We're also going to, like today, share tools and messaging to help you in the unfortunate event that violence does break out somewhere. So you can register now. Please do join us next week if you can. And then we also have our information up here so that you can be sure you're subscribed to our newsletter. If you have follow-up questions and you want to talk to me or Chip, our emails are right there. All the resources today, we're providing to everyone, but if you need additional assistance or wish to work with us on a closer level, please do get in touch. We are here to be a resource for you and help you be successful in working with your employees and other stakeholders. We do this stuff all year round, not just election season, engaging businesses and helping to protect and promote our democratic institutions. So we would love to hear from you. So with that, thank you once again to Derek and Andrew, and to all the partner organizations who develop these terrific communications resources that we shared today. Appreciate you all so much, and we hope to see you all on the next call. Have a great day, everybody.